In this tutorial, I'm going to show you how I make the edible tools for this bucket of wings and tool belt cake. It is a ton of fun to make these tools. I'm using Evil Cake Genius Reuse a Putty food grade reusable mold making putty, and it works super great for something like this. This is my first time using it, but basically you want to cut off the amount you're going to need. And this is what it looks like when you first take it out of the package. And then you follow the directions and you put it in the microwave. I can't remember what the intervals are, but it says right on the package. So you just follow those directions. And until you get it nice and soft into kind of this doughy sort of form. Now, I'm using gloves because this is still pretty hot. It's not too hot that I can't touch it, but it's still very warm. So keep that in mind. And you're just going to kind of form it into a lump shape. You want a flat surface so that you can move these things around once you're letting them kind of set. So I've got a cutting board here, and take the tools that you want, whatever tools you want to use. I'm using a couple of screwdrivers, a wrench, a hammer, a small hammer. Clean them off so they're not dirty. Make sure they're very dry before you do this. And there's a couple of different ways you can do this. You can do what I've just shown you here, which is just push them into the putty. And I just kind of, squeeze them around the tool a little bit afterwards and let them set that way. Don't push them all so that they're, touching the board. You want a little bit of the putty underneath them. And then once I've done that, I just kind of cut off the excess around them so that I can reuse that putty to make other tools. And then you're just going to want to let that set. So another way you could do it is you want to knead it really well. That's also on the package directions. And then you can place your tool on a flat surface and you can have your lump of putty here. And then you can push it down over top of your tool. So I'm making a cake using these, and I'm going to want these tools to lay flush against the side of my cake. So kind of like, the top part is 3D, but I want the back flat, or at least I can have the back flat and sitting flush against the cake. So this was the better option for me, to kind of push the putty over top of the tool, and that will give me a nice flat base when I pour the chocolate in. But either way works great. Okay, I'm doing that for all of these tools I have here, so I'll just show them to you. I have this long screwdriver. So far I've done a little screwdriver and the hammer and then this longer one. I don't do the long metal section of the screwdriver at the bottom there because it's just a little bit too thin, and I'm pouring chocolate into these and I knew that they would break if I did that. Plus these are going into a tool belt on a cake, so I don't need to have that bottom section showing. Okay, I've melted my candy melts, and now I am using Artisan Accents chocolate chameleon colors made for chocolate. You definitely want special colors made for chocolate when you are coloring candy melts, because regular gel will not work. It will seize up your candy melts. I'm using blue here because I'm going to make one of my screwdrivers blue, and I wanted to start with a blue base, so I've added just a little bit more blue to get it a little bit darker. When you melt your candy melts, definitely do it on half power or 70% power so that you don't burn them. And now I'm just kind of scraping the candy melts into my mold. Oh, I let my tools sit in my mold overnight just to make sure that they were set, but you don't have to let them sit that long. Sometimes they only need like an hour or two. I put my chocolate in and I'm kind of wiping down the sides a little bit. Now, a couple of tips. You don't want to overfill your molds, because if you overfill your molds, you're going to have this lip around the edge when you take them out that you're going to have to cut off. So the tendency is going to be to want to overfill, but definitely do not. I would not even fill it all the way up to the edge. What I filled here is even probably a little bit too much. I would even fill it less. Because I had to do a lot of trimming at the end, which is not a big deal. It's not hard to do, but it's just better if you don't fill it as much, because you will just have less work to do once you take these out of the mold. Okay, and again, I'm just kind of running my finger along the edge to clean up as much as I can that edge for when I take them out. And now I'm using a wooden skewer, and what I'm going to do is I'm just going to kind of push it in and kind of swirl it around. This is going to help get rid of any air gaps or any air bubbles you have down in the bottom of that mold, which will eventually, when you flip it over, be the top of the actual thing you're trying to mold. I didn't do this for some of the tools, like the hammer I didn't do this for, and I had a ton of air gaps, but it definitely works out better using that toothpick to get rid of those gaps, and you'll be much happier with your end result if you do that. Okay, so here I am unmolding the tools. I used a silver, I mixed some black into some of my modeling chocolate to create the wrench, and then light silver for the hammer, and I've got the blue, and you can see how they come out. It's very, very cool to see these when they come out. And but you will notice that a bunch of them, most of them, need to be trimmed down, because you'll see what I'm talking about now. The kind of lip that forms on the back of them, I didn't want to see that. I wanted them to look as realistic as possible. So I'm going to show you how I trim that down. It's actually way easier than I thought it was going to be. Here are those gaps I was talking about, those air gaps. And I didn't really have any in my screwdriver because I used that toothpick on it. I thought the details in the wrench were really cool, how they came out. I really love this Evil Cake Genius putty, because you can melt it down and reuse it again and again and again for any project that you have. So it really is a great investment. It's a little bit expensive, but so worth it, because you know you can make a mold of just about anything you want to if you have this putty. Okay, so I'm using my X-Acto knife here, and I'm just kind of running it at an angle along that bottom edge, and that cuts off that little edge so that you can't see it. Like I said, these are going to be laying flush against a cake, so you won't see the backs of them. And now by doing this little cutting job with my X-Acto, you won't see that little lip either. So here I'm going down along the side of the handle, getting rid of it. And they're just kind of using a scraper to get it out of the way, because if you don't move those shavings, they'll stick back to your hammer, to your modeling chocolate, and it will kind of make it messy. And then just keep going all the way around. It's actually fairly quick. I thought it was going to be a pain and take a while, but it didn't. It worked really, really well and was easy to do. Didn't capture it on camera, but I actually went into that hammer in between those 2 points on the back of it and cut in there. And that was easy to do as well, to kind of make that more realistic. Now I'm going to paint this. I'm using a highlighter on the wrench. I want it to be really, really silver. Now you wouldn't want to eat this wrench, because the highlighter is, while it's non-toxic, actually I don't even think highlighters, I'm not sure if it's considered non-toxic or not. It is made for cake decoration, funny enough, but you don't want to eat it. But there are some companies, Roxy and Rich makes a great silver edible hybrid luster dust. I couldn't find it, and so I couldn't use it for this project. But if you want to keep all things edible, there are definitely options, and I'll include a link to that as well. But what I've done is I've just put a little bit of Everclear, which is a very high proof grain alcohol, and I've dabbed it with that dropper onto the wrench, and then I've dipped my brush into the highlighter and just dabbed it over top of that Everclear. And this is one way to kind of create a paint on your tool. It works great on chocolate, and it just kind of mixes a little paint for you right on the tool and gets it to be nice and not blotchy and not streaky. It works really, really well. It's kind of a cool technique I learned from my friend Angela Morrison. And it really gave this wrench that high silver metallic shine I was going for. So I was very happy with that. I also did the same thing on the hammer before I did the coloring on the top of the hammer. To get the kind of rusty look on the top of the hammer, I have my wafer petal dust set here, and I found this kind of rust color. It's like a reddish brown, and you can take these wafer dusts are cool. You can kind of take them right out of their little slot there and just scrape off the petal dust into a little palette. And then I mixed just a tiny bit of Everclear. I didn't want a thin paint. I wanted it to be relatively thick, and I started dabbing it onto the top of the hammer. So I have a real hammer of Thomas's. It's actually a bigger one, but I I'm using that, and I'm going to show it to you in a minute, as my inspiration for the color I'm trying to get here. It's kind of rusted, it's kind of a blackish, sort of rusted out, very well used hammer. So starting with this rust color and just dabbing and dabbing. You can make it a little bit thicker if you want, but I didn't want to have a solid rust color covering the entire head of the hammer. So I then get out my edible art paints in brown, and I just have a little bit on there, and I just started kind of dabbing that on as well, trying to get the multi-tone look of the hammer I have as my inspiration. Here is the hammer. You can see there's brown in there, there's rust in there, there's a little bit of silver shining through. So that's the look I was going for. So I started with that rusty petal dust, and then moved to the edible art brown, dabbing and dabbing, sort of kind of dry painting it. And then finally ending with black petal dust, just kind of sticking my brush into it and really just dabbing it on. I'm not doing, a full coverage. I'm just kind of dabbing and wiping it around. So some parts are black. You can see the rusty petal dust in other parts, and a little bit of the brown, all kind of mixed together to create that rusty look on top of the hammer. And I was happy with how that came out. I actually took out my blue, it was sky blue, I believe. Yep, sky blue edible art paints for that blue screwdriver, just because the blue candy melts were a little too muted, and I wanted to shine them up a little bit and just add a little bit of a deeper blue on top. And because I started with the blue base, I only needed one coat, and it wasn't blotchy. It went on beautifully. So that's definitely an option for you too. Now, if you don't start with a base that is the same as the color you're trying to go for, you might have to put two coats on. I'll actually show you what I did to turn something red in a minute. But now I'm just using the same highlighter dust, silver, Everclear, and the dust to create the paint to make that bottom part of the screwdriver silver. That will kind of peep out of the tool bag once I add it to the cake. Okay, so now I've got this red. I've painted it once red. Here I have Roxy and Rich Autumn Blaze Petal Dust, the edible hybrid petal dust. I painted this one red at first. It was not a red base. It was, I think it was white or silver. So I didn't start with the red base. So I painted it once and it was blotchy. So instead of painting it again right away, I thought, what if I put some petal dust on it? Right on top of that red paint job. What would that look like? And I actually liked the look, except not for the screwdriver, because screwdrivers are generally, shiny and not kind of like rubbery or soft looking like this. So while it did a good job of covering it, I decided to paint over it again with another layer of the edible art red paint, and got this. So it was way less blotchy because I had that petal dust as kind of my second layer, and that worked well for me. And then these are wire cutters. So I'm just creating the handles. I thought handles sticking out of a tool belt would be really easy and cool. I didn't even have to make a mold to make them. So I'm using my fondant smoothers to just kind of roll out to the correct thickness the handles, and I'm cutting them into two pieces, of course. And using the fondant smoothers, rolling back and forth over them is really a great trick to get a nice evenness to whatever you're rolling out. And then I pushed it down gently on both of them to make them just a slightly flat. And then I'm cutting at an angle to a little bit of a point that I then just kind of pushed in to create that look, same look on the wire cutter handle. And now I am just kind of pushing them into shape, and then I'll let them dry there. I've used modeling chocolate, so once it sets, it will hold its shape when I put it on the cake. And yeah, I just kind of cut it to the right length, let them dry in their shape, and then I end up doing that red paint job on these, painting them red first and then putting the red petal dust over top, but not painting them again after that. And that gave me that kind of soft petal dust, rubbery-ish look on the handles, like on the real wire cutters. If you would like to see how to make this entire cake, the tutorial is over on cakeheads.com. If you're not a member yet, come join our family over there. We have a lot of fun and we learn so much, and it's really just a great place to learn all you can learn about cake decorating, and we would be honored to have you with us. See you later.